Reteach, podcast for teachers seeking fresh viewpoints, deeper subject knowledge, and diverse thinking.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Reteach Geography podcast for teachers seeking fresh viewpoints, deeper subject knowledge, and diverse thinking. Visit reteach.org.uk/subject/geography for resources to help you offer students broader perspectives on key topics and free-to-access guides, all written by subject experts. I'm your host, Kit Marie, and my pronouns are they, she. And today, I'm joined by Carey Curtis, Professor of City Planning and Transport and Honorary Professional Fellow at the University of Melbourne, Australia. She has spent many years researching this important issue of sustainable transport and published last year the editor of the Handbook of Sustainable Transport. Welcome, Carey.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I think it might have been 2 years ago now, but you lose track with the COVID times, don't you?
You certainly do. Yeah, you certainly do. I do my best to kind of look these things up and make sure I double check them. But of course, when you're doing these kind of things, I mean, I haven't been an editor of a book, but I have been a contributor to books. And sometimes the process is so long, they do take a while, don't they? I mean, especially if you're editing this book. I mean, you had a lot of contributors to that book.
I did. I was very lucky. I've had a long and happy career working with a lot of different people, so plenty of people to draw on.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And as I say, I've been on the other side of the coin where I've been a contributor, and my goodness, how hard you editors must have to work. I take my hat off to all editors listening, really, and yourself.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, the hint is in the title, I guess, of the book that you edited. But we're featuring this one, the Handbook of Sustainable Transport, because it's featured on one of our Reteach lists. So yeah, it might be stating the obvious, but you could probably tell us a little bit more. How would you sum up what your book is about, and what the perhaps it's probably best to go into kind of what makes up the book, the chapters and everything that make up the book.
Sure. So I'm sort of at the end of my research career, or getting toward the end. And I think when I began the book, I'd been invited to write the handbook by the publisher. And I was also at the point where I'm going, yeah, great, this story needs to be written. And I'm emphasizing the word story. It's an edited book. And often edited books are quite incoherent, and people buy them and go, oh, only these 2 chapters are any good to me and the rest isn't working. But I've been lucky. I've been researching in this field for more than 30 years. I started back in Oxford on a research project looking at how people travel, what decisions they make, and whether it makes a difference where they live in terms of how they travel. But I was at this point where I was feeling really gloomy. The idea of sustainability was something that came to the fore in my first year as a researcher. Then we were going, well, what on earth does this term mean? And then 30 years on, I'm thinking, wow, we still haven't really achieved a lot.
I would agree.
So I wanted to sort of really set a very strong narrative. So instead of this being a classic set of chapters that say, this is the latest research on X, I asked each contributor, what's the main topic in the area I'm asking you to write about? What's gone well? What hasn't gone well? What we call summative chapters, rather than that classic,
right,
here's my research question, here's the background literature, and then X equals Y. So they very much wanted to unpack this narrative. And really my career, 30 years career, as I've already said, the people I invited were people I've come across along the way. And I think the other thing that's really important is, although I've been a researcher, I've also been a practitioner. So my research is very applied. It's on the ground. I work with governments. I work in practice. I've been a planning commissioner, so sitting on the decision side of life as well. So hopefully that makes this kind of area very real. For me to understand something, it needs to be place-based and it needs to be real. You have to bring it alive with examples. So I split the book into 4 parts. And the first part, I can't even know what we called it. And it was basically, well, where did the term sustainable transport come about? What was the thinking in those early days? And how has that thinking unfolded and altered? So, for example, one of the key things that's important now when we think about sustainable transport is health.
Yeah.
So when the health guys came on board and started talking about rising obesity and childhood asthma and so on, that really steered the mission for sustainable transport in a clearer direction, I think. Then the second part was all about what I called integrated transport. So I'm living and working in Western Australia. I emigrated here 27 years ago. Very, very car dependent city is Perth, as many Australian cities are. For me, that was great. There's work to be done here. So the second part is all about thinking about all forms of transport, not just the car. So what does integrated transport mean? What does it look like in the street? How do we plan for it? How do we balance things? Although balanced transport is actually quite a dirty word. It gets misused. So you find a situation where, let's say, street designer engineer will be trying to work out what they can fit in a street cross-section. And they say, well, yeah, we've weighed up everything and we need parking lanes, we need turning lanes, we need through lanes. We've got to keep the traffic moving at a certain speed. Oops, don't have any room for cycle. Oops, don't have any room for the bus. So there's that kind of balance. Next part moves into thinking about how we integrate that with land use. So the urban development, the system, how they work together. And then the last part is really thinking about, if you like, if we know what we should be doing, why we should be doing it, how we might design a city differently, let's start to look at what all the levers are, what the sort of policy environment is, who else we should involve, how do we make it happen, and I guess, why isn't it happening? So there's some quite depressing work in there. And then I finish with a chapter that I wrote with Phil Goodwin. He was Professor of Transport at Transport Studies Unit in Oxford when I began my career. And I said to him, I think, between us, we could write a really good manifesto for the future. So there's optimism. What do we need to do? We spent 30 years here trying. We've made some progress. It's been patchy. It's been glacially slow. So what's our manifesto? What do we want others to take forward? So I'm delighted you're asking me to sort of be like it inspire teachers and the future generations, and hopefully they can do it a damn sight quicker than we have.
Yeah, well, and what's really interesting there, Carey, is that in terms of all the Reteach recommended reading lists, there aren't very, very many edited books on there, a collection of either research or whatever it is. Yours is actually one of the few. And that's a big compliment because the people who made these lists are teachers themselves. So the person who recommended your book was David Newell, who's head of geography in a high school in West Sussex. So he clearly has seen the value of your book from a teaching point of view. And when you just told us then that the end of the book is like a manifesto and you've got all these different chapters, unfortunately for me, I don't teach high school anymore. It's a bit of a shame, but I most certainly can, as you were listing all those things that you do, I'm like, oh, I could have used that bit for that unit. I could use that bit for that unit. And the students, when we were doing our coursework, I was just remembering back to a GCSE fieldwork we did about Cambridge and land use and transport in Cambridge. I was like, oh, that would have been fantastic, further reading material for them to put into as their secondary research and stuff. So that's absolutely fantastic. And just everybody, a quick story, because I like to try and bring things into context to British schools over here. I used to work in a rural school and just outside of Norwich. And it almost seemed overnight, Carey, where they went from a settlement of about 800 dwellings and they had planned and built a further 800, effectively doubling the size of the settlement over the space of just a couple of years. It was really rapid expansion of this commuter town just outside of Norwich. But of course, what did they not consider, as you've alluded to in your book? How everything else is linked together. How is the transport going to work? And then not just the transport, but what about the infrastructure to make that all work? It just was not considered. And it was already a real polluted, congested area because it was the only main route through that area into Norwich. And there was nothing relief done. So yeah, I think we see this more often than we should. So I can understand why you use the word depressing at some point. I'm just going to read what David put on his list so folks can see how it is, and then you can perhaps comment on maybe aspects of this. So David said, a hands-on academic book drawing on a range of geographical data in the search of the elusive paradigm of sustainable transport. So you can see he's picked that up from you. Each chapter is highly authoritative and explores a wide range of case studies to demonstrate what can be achieved and that sustainable transport can be a reality. And I do want to ask you about this next bit in a second. The key components of sustainability are analysed in this case, the triple helix of social, economic and environmental sustainability, and are supporting a fundamental shift away from increasing car numbers and the provision of an infrastructure to cope. And then he gives some examples about how this can be applied to GCSE and A-level work, as I've already alluded to. So, so what you've already mentioned it a little bit, but why is it so important that we have to look at sustainable transport through all those sustainability lenses? So social, economic, environment, and I'll even add political in that as well.
Yeah, it's important, but that is also, I think, part of the reason that it's a problematic area. So when I started, as I said, 30 years ago, we were going, what on earth is sustainability? And it was very much about the environment. And then I emigrated and I suddenly discovered that they called it environmental sustainability. And sustainability included the economic, it included the social, and later on this kind of fourth pillar, which was governance. So I think one of the problems with the economic is back to that balancing act. In a way, the priority, well, not in a way, absolutely the priority has to be the environment. You can't have an economy if you completely destroy the environment. I don't care what other people say. I think it's an elusive paradigm. I love his term because although there was this push and there are government policies, the aspirations towards sustainable transport, nobody ever said we shouldn't continue to design our cities around the car and private travel and long distance and high speed travel. I think as I've reached the end of my career, I would say, I think we've been too polite. In order to be heard around sustainable transport, we've said, oh, yes, well, we're not anti-car. You can still blah, blah, blah. But in fact, I think we now do need to say we really need to get real because we are not builder. You can't have both paradigms tracking together. What else? What have I answered your question?
Yeah, well, I'm going to share it because I actually own an EV myself, and I'm very, very aware of the drawbacks as well as the benefits of having an electric car. But I know that if there were the options available to me, I would certainly be out of that car and doing other things because at the end of the day, it is still taking up space on the road. It is still shedding rubber all over the place. Obviously everything. I like to say it's not a more environmentally friendly option. I say it's less of an environmentally destructive option. But that's not good enough. Yeah, if I still lived in Norwich when I used to bike everywhere. I used to even cycle out to that school 5 miles away outside of town. But I think, all that glee weaving through the cars that are stuck in traffic and everything. But yeah, we're here in this town in the middle of South Norfolk. You can't get anywhere unless you have private transport. It is really poor. And even the train link, which directly links between Norwich and London, is exceptionally poor.
Yeah.
And yet, if I want to go down to London with my family, as we're planning to do over the Easter holiday, we've just booked our tickets, actually, everybody. And for the four of us, it is £160. It is absolutely ridiculous that the priority is completely wrong.
Yes.
Is completely wrong.
Yes. I think you've raised a number of issues there. How we prioritise and investment in that. Transport choice. If we're going to having your example of the doubling of that settlement, I bet it wasn't just that there wasn't any planning for all modes of transport. I bet too that there wasn't any planning for the activities that people need to get to on a daily basis and trying to make them close by. And this is despite UK government policy saying that they should. And they don't because of this economic dimension that we're trying to adapt settlements that have been designed for 60 years around the car. And that's a very powerful agglomeration economy. And it's quite hard then to run in tandem with it. But yes, I think you've raised some really important points there.
Let's go back to kind of like maybe your bit of inspiration when you were a bit younger. When you were in college school, were there any particular like written books or material that really inspired you to kind of like take the route that you did? For me, actually, believe it or not, this is going to sound weird to everybody, and this is a if you know, you know kind of thing, and you might know, Carey, but for me, it was really the David Woff or the David War kind of geography textbooks, which are absolutely iconic, even though, we know that they would be written a lot different nowadays. But was there anything for you? I mean, it doesn't have to be a non-fiction. It could be even fiction that maybe brought you into the kind of the realm that you're into at the moment.
That was the toughest question in your list. Maybe just old age, trying to think back. And maybe because that wasn't always my path. I mean, I loved geography. That was one of my favourite subjects, but I also did dress design and fabrics. And I actually really wanted to work in textiles.
Oh, wow.
Like many, I do a little bit more of that now. But I pondered over that and thought, well, which books inspired me? I think it was more the teachers. What really worked for me was the power of being in a place, observing it, walking around and saying, why is this place like this? Why did they do this and not this? So I'm sorry, I can't pinpoint a book, but I can pinpoint, I guess, individuals who inspired me in places that where you went and said, this place seems to be really great. And I still have it now. I travel a lot for work. I work in Sweden, I work in Europe, and I work in Australia. And now these days with the phone, it has how many steps you make. Last year when we finally were allowed to leave the country, it was May and October, my steps quadrupled in those 2 months because I was finally in places where it was comfortable to walk, places the activities I needed were close enough. There was good public transport and the design of places were really great. You wanted to be outside. You wanted to experience them. And then I come back here and go, oh, I'm lucky if I can get 100 steps.
Yeah, it's exactly the same around here. If you're going to go for a walk around here, it really is to just nip down into town and back in very quickly, or actually to go for a walk, like in the local fen or the park, which is lovely, but, I'm
also thinking about when you described Norwich, and I think this is so true of many, many cities across the world, that they have these they're sort of like a city of two faces. They have these very rich, accessible cores with all the amenity, all the activity, all the transport choice. I think there's a lot we can talk about as to whether, thinking of the Oxford case study, it might be transport choice, but it's pretty unsafe and unpleasant. But then you have this sort of suburban hinterland where it doesn't have any of that.
Yeah.
Yet this is where we're building all the homes and forcing people to live. And we're designing, if you look at Australian cities, we design them so that I'd love to get a graphic of this. One day I'll find a graphic designer, but we have the central business district core, shiny glass towers, sort of 20, 40 stories, and then this really low density single story suburban. And in my mind, I have this graphic where basically it goes, every morning, as all the people from those houses end up in these shiny glass towers. And I'm sort of, why? Why did we do that? Why has Paris not? I know Paris and London, they've both got these shiny glass centres. They've also got an awful lot of it. It's 3-4 story and quite diverse. And it comes down to the choices people and politicians have made.
I know that people listening can definitely tell your passion. So have you heard of the recent plans by Newham Borough Council with regards to their shutting off streets or something like that, or the
local tripping net LTNs?
That's the one. Yeah. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the Oxford one because I was there last October and happened to be visiting a long-standing colleague who lives in one of these shut-off streets. And it was, and again, this comes back to observation and being in place, which is something that geography students do so well. Get out there, see how it feels, how does it look, what are you observing? And as we walked, I'd arrived on the bus from London and we walked down the street and I went, I must be deaf, I can't hear anything. Yeah, I thought I had aeroplane ear. And then she said, no, that's because there's no cars here. And those that are mainly electric now. And it was astounding, the difference in the atmosphere. I thought, this is pretty good. And then she told me about all the woes because of the conflict that this LTN had been imposed in COVID times to enable people to travel more actively. But where the bollards had clearly been burnt several times and bashed into. And then I was doing a course while I was there, and that was in North Oxford. As I walked down the street, about 6 buses passed me. I thought, oh, great. I bet there won't be one for a while, and how right I was. And then 4 of them all turned up. They were all owned by one particular company, and they refused to accept my app. Lunchtime, I was later and later for this course and started walking. Got there in the end. The person who was teaching the course lived next to this LTN, and she told me the story of how difficult it had become to get her children to 2 different schools and for her to get across to North Oxford because of what, if you look at the book, the sorts of things that Oxford has done over 25 years have been amazing in terms of pedestrianising the main streets, pushing the buses out and then pushing the cars further and further out. It had all the right ingredients to enable people to travel other ways, but it was awful. As I stood waiting for this bus that's not choice. I stood there for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And then I got the refusal of, nope, your app's not the right one for us. But I watched people trying to use this street, and there were e-bikes, there were electric scooters, there were normal conventional bicycles, there were so many different delivery vehicles and the buses and cars, and it was so unsafe. I was shocked. And so this is something the book talks about later on, is that you can have the idea, but you've got to have a really good, coordinated, integrated plan to enable it to happen. Because what they've done, in my view, is hurt people without giving them the choice. And it's actually, I think, inherently unsafe. And the problem is when you implement an idea like that and it goes badly, in my view, we don't have the time for it to go badly.
No.
We need to try a lot harder to get it right in the first place.
Yeah.
So Oxford, send everyone to Oxford, go and have a look.
Yeah. It's as though they're trying, you've, the way that we've built up upon our Victorian systems is as though it's just like a messy plug socket where you've just plugged things in without any consideration. It's end up in a tangle. And that solution is almost like they're trying to untangle the wires without unplugging things. It's like, no, we must have our cake and eat it. And so you can't really do it. And if you could end up with frayed wires, everything like that. I'm one with my analogies, Carey. But what we really need to do is almost need to unplug and start again. And I think we do need to take, it may seem painful to start with, because we do have to kind of start again in a way, because the fact that we're trying to integrate it into what we already do is, in a sense, unsustainable, in my opinion, because we are built around the car. It's really interesting. I'm really interested in how we go forward. And I know that Norwich have tried to do quite a fair bit, but it's the same again. They've really done a lot of work in the centre of Norwich, pedestrianised roads. They've now made St Stephen Street, for example, bus only, when cars used to be able to go down there. And it's really, the centre of Norwich is quite a nice place to be as a pedestrian, but it's not translating, it's not filtering out to the inner city, to the inner suburbs, et cetera, and then you get to like around the University of East Anglia, which is in the kind of like inner to outer suburbs. And then you've got, it's nice again, but we can't be doing these things in these isolated pockets, as you said, integrated. It needs to be integrated. But what has been your experience though, of your best experience? Have you ever seen something? I mean, you mentioned some European countries, stuff like that, but have you ever seen something or been on a transport net when you thought, this is it. Oh, this is perfect. Or this is close to what we're trying to get to?
I'd have to answer this in several parts. So design. So I used to have this idea, I can't remember what the movie was, The Street of Perfect Proportions was the phrase in it, in a young woman walking down a street. I think it was an Italian or a Spanish street. But I always had this idea in my mind that, well, could you design a street that he had the right land uses and activity, had the right mix of transport? And I finally got to one of these. I had this template in my head. And I got to it, and it's not very useful for your UK people, but you can get a little Google man out. Grey Street in Brisbane. It's on the South Bank. And I got there and I went, wow, here's the street. Here's the one that's designed right. And I walked down and went, oh, what's missing? And it was, I called it the grunge factor. It was like an architect's drawing, and it was like being in it. It had no life. Every single shop unit, cafe unit was the same size, and they had the sort of designer colour thing, but it had no kind of feel, other amenity, things that attract you. So yes, there are examples. You could pinpoint design and say design it like this, but something else is missing there. And I think a really good example, a chapter that still really inspires me in the book is Ghent's Living Streets, Leafstraat, I think it's called. And that chapter was written by somebody who had been a facilitator of changing streets at the grassroots level. And this was quite an inspirational chapter in that the municipality, Ghent municipality, had said, okay, well, we'll just facilitate. You go, well, listen to the community. We won't impose anything. And this guy had gone out with others and sat down with people in streets and said, well, how would you like your street to be? And said, well, we don't want it littered with cars. We'd like to be able to meet and have a barbecue in the street. We want the kids to be able to play football safely, etc., etc. So what they did is said, well, how can we make this happen on a temporary basis? So they did it, I think, for a summer, and everybody in the street was involved. And they had to, so the council or the municipality came in to help us. Well, how will we get the rubbish trucks down if you make this a park instead of a through street? How will we reorganize the traffic? Where will you park, etc.? So they used their technical skills, but in a way that was driven by the community. And of course, there were naysayers in the community. I need my car right outside my door. But they worked, and the agreement was it was temporary and we would give it a try. Brilliant. And some of them just lasted a summer. Some of them perhaps stayed, and they progressed in, if you like, their integrated land use transport strategy for the rest of the city on that basis. So for me, I think that's a really good example of how to go about it. So working from the grassroots. But then I think the third example is what we try and pick up in that final chapter, this business about strategic consistency. Everybody, every government department, every private sector individual, every community member, all needs to be moving in the same direction, and we're not. So we've got property investors wanting shiny glass towers and a planning system that allows them, but that might not be helpful. We've got a media that likes to jump on board and be the naysayer when we could just give something a try. We need to think beyond the role of just, say, the Urban Planning Office or the Transport Office in its various guises, to thinking about education, hospitals, so on and so forth. We all have a role to play. So we had in our city a health department that decided it would reorganise its hospitals across the metropolitan area based on efficiency of running a hospital. So it meant a central hospital, which was accessible because it was in the centre by all the train lines and the buses, ceased to be that. And it was put somewhere that was inaccessible. And so that's what I mean by strategic consistency. All of us need to look through the approach together and talk and understand each other. Sit down in place-based workshops like this Living Streets little example, and say, okay, well, if we did this, what are the implications? And really try and talk it through and come up with a solution that you can try. And I think this temporary, try it, let's have a demonstration, let's see how it feels, would be the step forward rather than this kind of big stick approach, which I worry will happen. If you think about what happened with COVID.
Yeah.
If we think about suddenly climate change, the temperatures have hit, we've really seriously got to do something much faster, then we may end up with solutions that none of us are comfortable with.
Yeah.
So I think we owe it to ourselves now to try and work our way forward.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And we could spend another half an hour with my specialism, which is climate change and climate change transition.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just thinking I need to get on again to my kids' primary school because they have a massive problem with traffic, inconsiderate parking, idling engines, and stuff like that. And I think what I will probably do is once this goes live, I'll send this to them and say, look, I had a brilliant conversation with Carey Curtis, who edited this book. Can we just please give the school streets thing a try for a term, for a half term, get the council, because I tell you what, it's on the edge of town. Well, it's in between two settlements. It's on the edge of town and the edge of the conjoining village. And so people come from all directions. The village hall have been lovely. They say, which is about 2 minutes walk away. They say you can use our car park. They open up their car park during the school run. But I just think the way that the road is set up, because it's on the corner of a couple of roads, the way that the road system is set up around there, I think it would work perfectly as a school street. I really do. I think it would work perfectly. So yeah, I'm going to recommend that.
Yeah, don't miss the point that you have to work with everyone and convince them.
Absolutely.
So you make the job of the council so much easier. So another good example is summer pedestrianisation in Gothenburg. So way back, some of the local businesses, the restaurants and bars went, we'd really like outdoor seating and areas, in these particular streets. They were just off the main medieval core. So they went to the council. So we think this idea of, summer pedestrianisation would be good. And they went, okay, you've got to go and get everyone on board first before we'll even touch it. If you like, blamed, and it wasn't this authoritative figure coming down. So the businesses did. They talked to each other. They agreed. They, of course, got this, if you like, extra selling space out in the public domain. But they went back to council, we're all signed up, we all agree, the residents above are happy. And then the council said, okay, well, we'll come up with a one-way street system to support this.
Oh.
So, yeah, and you have to work very hard with people.
Yes, you do. Yeah, you do. But it is giving it a try. And I think if you go up to someone and you say, let's give it a try, it is not permanent. And then you can evaluate it, you do your whole SWOT analysis, all that kind of stuff. And then people might, that is probably the way to turn people. People are like, I don't like this because it inconveniences me or whatever, or it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And actually that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Or that didn't work quite as well as it could have done. So, but we can tweak it X, Y, and Z. So yeah, give it a try. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion, Carey. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I'm just going to ask you one last question. This is always an impossible question, but I ask it anyway. If there was only one thing in your book that you strongly feel teachers must know and pass on their knowledge to their students, what would it be? I mean, that's just crazy when you're the book editor, surely. What one thing? I suppose giving things a try is a good one, but
I mean, I keep raving about the Living Streets chapter, because it just tells the story of community and its relationship with government, and how you might succeed. I have to say it was one of the hardest chapters I edited, because the guy who wrote it was a practitioner, not an academic, and he wrote it, it was Flemish translated to English, and I hadn't kind of appreciated what happens with Flemish language when you use Google Translate. So, and also I'm very strong on narrative, as I said at the beginning, and this was sort of all over the place, and I was trying to unpack, but it was worth the effort for me. But there's so many others. And I love all the work around accessibility, and I think that appeals immensely in the geography sphere. And I guess you can see my roots, and I'm talking here not about universal access, which is around ensuring you design for less able people as well, but I'm talking about conceiving a city in terms of its accessibility by different transport modes.
Wow.
But so there's some good chapters in there that start to say, well, how do we design cities around accessibility rather than mobility?
Right.
And so the solutions are different. They're around reducing distance, around ensuring the mix of activities that are within walking distance. But we've done a lot of work in this area around public transport. It's another book, but we've looked at 26 cities around the world and measured their public transport accessibility. What shocked me when we began this work, we presented it to government, first of all here and then beyond, that because everybody's like this small piece in this big jigsaw puzzle, public transport planners think about signalling and headways for trains and how you make all of that work, and they're governed by whether they can prove there'll be enough bums on seats on this extra service they put in. We showed these classic geography maps, color-coded. Green is good, red is bad, black is people living there, but there's no public transport. And suddenly the whole city gets lit up with these colors, and the public transport plans go, about a city like that.
There we are.
So very, very powerful, if you like, geography tool being used in a discursive way to get all these different players in the jigsaw puzzle to think, what are we actually doing here? Are we designing the city to enable people to use public transport, or are we... Of course it matters, the signalling, and of course there's an economic argument that you need to ensure there's demand, but equally, if you don't build it, there never will be. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I didn't answer your question, Mel.
No, but what a fantastic message to end on. Carey, I've really, really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much for giving up your evening for us.
Yeah,
it's been an absolute delight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, David. Please pass on my thanks. I'm so delighted.
Amazing. So, folks, this podcast was produced for Reteach, and the producer is Michael Brzezinski. Visit reteach.org.uk/subject/geography for resources to help you offer students broader perspectives on key topics and free to access guides, all written by subject experts. I'm Kit Marie, and thank you for joining us.